Thank you all for coming. Do you know about SeaWorld? We have SeaWorld, and they have a splash zone where if you sit in there's no splash zone. Like, nobody's sitting here, but you're not going to get splashed. I'm not doing anything. But I know, I like the, let's start at the back, and then the later you are, the closer you have to sit to the front. You have to sit close to the speaker. It's easier to nap if you're not up here, right, during the talk. Well, I apologize for my voice, first of all. I don't know what happened. Some people have told me that there's a lot of pollen in the air. Maybe that's it. Or maybe it's like Kirsty's been working me like a dog since I've been here. I'm not sure which of those two things it is, but it doesn't hurt me, but I apologize for inflicting it on you. What I do is radio. And so I don't think it's from talking too much, because I talk all the time. That's all I do is talk. So maybe it was the airline, the flight, I don't know. Excuse me. But I'll try to be bearable while talking with you. How many of you know something about Catholic Answers? Like, you've seen Catholic Answers videos, or maybe some of you have heard the radio show? Anybody? You have? A few? And has anybody here ever called in to the radio show? Because we do get calls from New Zealand. So I wanted to see. No? Bill's not here? Okay. We get calls from all around the world now. It's a lot of fun. Catholic Answers, just for those of you who don't know, Catholic Answers is an organization that's been around for about 40 years, excuse me. About 40 years, and it's devoted to explaining and defending the Catholic faith. It started as mostly publishing little pamphlets on the Catholic Church that could easily be handed out. One of them was Pillar of Fire, Pillar of Truth, which has been handed out to millions of people around the world. And it grew from there to include other parts of the apostolate. And 25 years ago, last January, the radio program started. And the radio program is very, very simple. You just get to call and ask questions about the Catholic faith. And we have experts there, who are clergy or lay, who will answer your questions about the Catholic faith. And it wouldn't seem like that would be very popular, but we went from being on 7 stations to now being on more than 350 stations, almost 400 stations across the United States, and then on people's apps all around the world. Because we give the show away for free. No one ever has to pay for it. Our donors pay for it. So we ask them to pay for the show so that anybody can have it. So we never say no to anybody. If you want to run it on if any of you have a radio network, or if any of you have an app, you're welcome to it. We'll give you the keys. And so it's grown around the world as well. So now we sit there for 2 hours every afternoon from 3 to 5 in the afternoon in San Diego, California, and we take calls. And the calls they're mostly, of course, from the United States, because we have all those radio stations there. And you don't have satellite radio here, do you? Never mind, neither does anybody else. I'm sorry I told you about that. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. No, but in the U.S. they have satellite radio, so we're on the satellite radio as well. So we get lots of people who listen to us accidentally, and so they either get really annoyed that Catholics are talking, and so they call to say Catholics should go away, but we enter into these really cool conversations. And among the things we do is we'll do 2 hours, say on a Wednesday or Friday or something, and it'll be call if you, why don't you believe in God? That's the name of it. Why don't you believe in God? So only people who don't believe in God get to call. And because we're a Catholic radio show, you would think, well, how many people that don't believe in God are going to go? The lines fill up the minute we say it, and they stay full for the entire 2 hours, where atheists want to explain to us why they're atheists. And we have really good conversations with them. And I think it's educational for everybody. It's educational for the audience, because you can go back and forth about the arguments for God, the evidence for God, that kind of thing. So we do another show called Why Are You Pro-Choice? And people call up. Now, again, you would think, it's a Catholic radio show, is this a huge pro-choice? Well, yes, it is. We have a huge pro-choice audience who will call up, and they'll explain to us, and we'll have conversations, dialogues, and often Trent Horn. Excuse me, you know Trent Horn? Yeah. Anybody? You guys are familiar with Trent Horn? He comes across as a really nice guy, I think, but he's not. He's a horrible person, because Trent does the pro-life show, or Why Are You Pro-Choice show, and of course he takes the pro-life position, and he gives examples. So the priest asked me this morning at the other parish, he said, why does Trent always kill you? Because Trent does these examples where he goes, like the person will say something about abortion, and Trent will want to use an example of a larger person, and he'll go, for example, if Cy was in a boat, and then he'll kill me in the boat. And one time he said to a person, he told this young woman who was a supporter of abortion, would you kill Cy in this, would it be right to kill Cy in this situation? So that's actually the thing that I'm probably most famous for in the world, that Trent Horn kills me on virtually every show. And this was her answer. She said, well, that depends. What country are we in? And I practically slammed my head on the desk. I said, are you kidding me? Like, murder is... She goes, well, people have different values in different countries, so I can't say if it's right or wrong. And so these are the kind of conversations we have where people are really out there in their moral thinking, like way out in a different universe, and we have the conversations. And sometimes we do, why aren't you Catholic? Or we do one for Catholics, which Catholic doctrine bothers you? And Catholics call up and tell us which Catholic doctrine bothers them. And these are great conversations, and especially the why are you pro-choice ones, I really like them because I don't think anybody else in the world does that. You never hear on CNN an actual honest conversation between, not trying to make points back and forth, but trying to have a conversation for 2 hours. Just call and we'll talk about this, even if you disagree with us, or only if you disagree with us. So I think Catholic radio is extremely important, and it's very exciting. It's a very exciting thing. And from, Catholic Answers, from this radio program, Matt Fradd went out and did his own thing where he does Pints with Aquinas now. And Jason Everett went out and started chastity.com, and he does his chastity ministry, which is why I think, this is one of the reasons, because of this big radio revolution in Catholic radio, in the United States we have a lot of podcasting and blogging and all kinds of social media stuff about the Catholic Church. It's very vibrant and exciting, and also sometimes really annoying. Like there's very many angry Catholics. There's very many wanting to fight about things Catholics. So we get a lot of that. But we've managed somehow, because we have people like Trent and Jimmy Aiken and Tim Staples, Carlo Broussard, Joe Heschmeyer. These are very settled, mature Catholic men who don't get in a lot of fights with people. Those are our current apologists right now. And so it's not really angry. It's merely a conversation about the faith. And I've found that over the years, what I've found doing this, having these conversations, is that we almost never, virtually never, argue people into the faith. That almost never happens. But when we get a lot of people who say, I've been listening for a year, and it's starting to make sense to me. So there's that slow kind of almost erosive work where people who were raised one way or had certain assumptions start to go, well, this does make sense the more you explain it. But the thing that I think explaining the faith mostly does, it doesn't argue people into the faith, but it argues away some of the obstacles that are between them and the faith. So often they'll say, I just don't understand how Catholics can worship Mary. And then we can tell them, we don't worship Mary, and we can work through that obstacle with them. And a lot of times people have a misconception about the Catholic faith, and we love to tell them, hey, guess what? That's wrong about the Catholic faith. But sometimes people call up and say shocking things about the Catholic Church, like, I heard that you believe that piece of bread is actually the body of Jesus Christ. And then we go, hey, good news. We actually do believe that. You nailed it. And then we get to have a conversation about, because sometimes it's the things that they get wrong about the church that keeps them out, and sometimes it's the things that they get right that's keeping them out, and they just need help understanding it. So that's what I think of us as, we're in the obstacle removing business. It's obstacle removal, and sometimes it works. And there's lots and lots of people. I've met quite a few here in New Zealand who have told me that Catholic Answers and other Catholic media helped them come into the Catholic Church. And I think it's very important that we be in the public space to have these conversations. We can't be privately Catholic, because the church will die if we do that. It will roll up and blow away like a tumbleweed. And so we got to be there. But we got to be careful about how we're there. We got to do so in a knowledgeable and charitable and clear and helpful way, where we actually like the people. Like, I have talked to many, many pro-choice people who I believe left the conversation with us knowing that we didn't hate them, that we like them, we enjoy the conversation with them. We want them to change their mind. We want them to come to a deeper knowledge, a clearer moral vision, but we don't hate them, and we're not mad at them. So it's something that I really love being a part of. For a long time, for more than a decade, I was the editor of a Catholic newspaper, the diocesan newspaper of the Diocese of San Diego in the United States. And I can remember the day I was driving in my car and I first heard Catholic radio. And I just felt so excited, like all these things that we've been saying in this newspaper, week after week, month after month, that goes out to the Catholics, like the whole world is getting to hear. Like this is going to people who are not donating at the parish. This is going to everybody. And so what I did after that was, are you familiar with the concept of stalking? I went to the Catholic radio people and I basically stalked them for 2 years until they let me work there. And I'm so happy I did, because I feel so at home in Catholic radio. I feel like it's the place, you know. I feel like it's doing almost in a hidden way, because not even all Catholics know that we have these big Catholic media networks. I'll tell you one more thing about this work, and then I'd like to get into the kind of the meat of what I want to talk about. But I want this little tidbit I want to give you to encourage you to try it yourself. This Catholic media thing. There's a state in the United States called Nebraska. Have any of you heard of Nebraska? You've heard it. You know about Nebraska? What do they have in Nebraska?
They've got a very nice Latin priest seminary there.
Oh, well, I didn't even know that. Okay, so now I've learned something about Nebraska. I had no idea. They have a very nice Latin priest seminary in Nebraska. Nebraska is one of these northwestern states. It's in the Midwest of the United States. And it's up in the north, and it's rolling hills, and every single hill in the state of Nebraska is covered with corn. It's a corn state. So in addition to traditionalist priests, they have a lot of corn. Every fall, they have the corn festival, where they make a corn maze, and they build a giant corn house. You see what I'm getting at? These people love corn, okay? They have a football team, an American football team, and they love their American football team, watch it every Saturday in the fall. That team is called the Cornhuskers, okay? This is a corn state. So it's a farm state with 2 cities in it, and the cities are medium to, yeah, they're probably medium. They're not small, but they're medium-sized cities. But God blessed that state with a freakish amount of radio talent for Catholic radio. They have the best Catholic radio network in the world. They cover the state of Nebraska, and they go out into a couple other states, but they're just the best. They just do it really well. And sometimes you see that in Catholic ministry, that some parish is just blessed with a group of people who can make it go, or some diocese is blessed with the ministries and Nebraska is blessed with great radio talent, people who can manage the stations, people who can develop the programming, and people who can market the whole thing. They're good. So people call us and they say, hey, you know, I know you're Catholic Answers, and I'm going to start a Catholic radio station, and I need some help. Can you guys give me some advice? And we always say, no, we're not the people to talk to. You got to call Jim in Nebraska. And so, somebody called not too long ago saying, I'm in Pennsylvania and I need help with this. And we just turned them over to Jim in Nebraska. So this is a little American state with this amazing capacity to make Catholic radio, and they're changing the world by teaching other people how to do Catholic radio, but they made an app, the Nebraska Spirit Catholic Radio app, okay? So one day we're answering the phones just like we always do, and calls come in locally and nationally and internationally, and there's a call from Nigeria, and it's the middle of the night in Nigeria. We do get a pretty good number of calls from Nigeria because there's a lot of Catholics in Nigeria. And also, I think they have a really good phone system, because there's places in the world where you can't call an American toll-free number, but they can. So, or maybe they're just really good at computers or something. I don't know. But we get quite a few calls from Nigeria. The people who stay up late, and this woman calls from Nigeria, and we always ask people if it's from a place that's a little off the beaten track. You know, if some dude calls from Sweden, we go, "How'd you hear about us?" So how'd you hear about us? And this woman said, oh, I found this app called the Spirit Catholic Radio app, and I started listening to it. So it occurred to me, these people in Nebraska most of whom probably could not find Nigeria on a map. And these people in Nigeria who definitely cannot find Nebraska on a map. If they can, they are geographic geniuses, and they have a lot of useless knowledge in their heads. They are connected in the body of Christ. They're connected in this communion. And there's no such thing anymore as just succeeding locally if you're doing Catholic media. You can have a global impact by doing small things, podcasts like Matt Fradd. You know, Matt Fradd. You guys know him, right? The Australian who does the interviews. Total phony, but he's so... No, that's not really true. That's not really true. But he has a worldwide impact because he sits in a room and talks with, Catholic philosophers or Catholic theologians or priests or whatever. So you should do it. You should encourage those people in your community who want to make Catholic media. Maybe throw them a few bucks to help them. Or do it yourself if you've got ideas of doing Catholic media. It could really impact someone somewhere. And the world is in a pretty dark place. Now, I am feeling really good after a week in New Zealand about the human race. I did not leave Los Angeles feeling good about the human race. I was thinking maybe it was time for the lemurs to take over or something. And maybe things are not good where I come from. As a matter of fact, I often start a talk, I'll go to a room, maybe a room full of people, and I'll say, who here thinks things are going well? That's all I say. I don't say where or what. And invariably in the United States, that's hilarious. People start laughing because everybody knows it's not going well. So nobody's going to... So occasionally there's a person who's had too much wine before. They're like, I think it's going great. But it's like they laugh at that because it's clear things are not going well in the U.S. And you don't even have to specify, just things. But it's nice to come here and find out, like you're having an election, or like you're in the middle of an election right now. How many people have been murdered so far in the election? Well, you're up to 0, right? Okay, well, congratulations on that. Because our election is a year and a month away, and we're already way ahead of you in murders related to the election. So it's a much nicer country.
You want to stay a bit longer?
Should I? Will I find out the truth if I stay a bit longer? Oh, well, then I won't feel so bad about saying that it is a dark time. We know it's a dark time because our young people are struggling so much. You can't have a civilization where young people struggle so much. Many of our older people feel abandoned and forgotten. And if you're in the middle, we call that the sandwich, You're taking care of the older generation, you're taking care of the younger generation, and many of those relationships of people that age are really not what they should be. They're struggling terribly. We have a terrible struggle. I don't know how it is here, but we have a terrible struggle with addiction in the U.S. And I mean every kind of addiction. Depression, suicide, all that. So the question that I had then is, how did we get to this spot? Because let's go back to the turn of the 20th century, 123 years ago. Do you know that the world was full of optimism about what it meant to be modern? It was an extremely optimistic moment. People felt we were on the verge of, and you can read it in the newspapers and the magazines of the time. In the United States, the 1890s are called the gay 90s. And not gay like we mean it now, but gay like, it was so happy and up and things were looking so great. So what happened to that period, from that period to this period, the things didn't work out the way we wanted. Even if you went to the 1960s, there's a sense of optimism there about the UN. The UN was new, and about rockets going into space and the jet age and mass communication. Something has happened that has taken all the anticipation, all of the high expectations away. And we say, what happened? What happened to us? So I just want to take a brief tour through the last 500 years. It's a very brief tour through the last 500 years. That will take the first 2 hours of the talk. And then in the second 2 hours, no, that's not really how it's... I actually do want to take a tour through 500 years, though, because this is what we think, or this is what we tell ourselves, and this is part of why we feel so bad. That after the medieval period, the modern period started, and we've had this steady progress. Actually, not even steady progress, upward sloping progress, right? So that the curve is getting higher. So we make more progress in 10 years now than we were making in 100 years before. And soon that'll be every year. And then, and in a certain sense, that story is true. Like, we can see that that story is true. That there is this upward sloping progress from 500 years ago to today. Now, in order to limit it to 500 years ago, I have to be prejudiced against the Catholic people of the pre-Reformation years. Because actually, if you really look at it, that slope starts 1,500 years ago with the fall of the Roman Empire, when things are looking really bad. From then, there's an upward slope through the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages don't leave the world a mess. They leave the world much better than when they started. So, if you take nothing else from what I say today, I hope you will remember this and feel confident about this. The modern world was not built on the failures of the Middle Ages. The modern world was built on the successes of the Middle Ages. And it's a lie to say that things had gone downhill until about the beginning of the modern period, and then we had Enlightenment and science and all that. All that Enlightenment and science stuff started 500 years before Isaac Newton was born. 600, 700 years. One of the greatest mathematicians in the history of the world is Gerbert of Aurillac. You can look up Gerbert of Aurillac. He, in the late 900s and early 1000s, he was an Italian mathematician who just was a genius. And he brought into Europe the Indo-Arabic numerals, and he introduced into Europe the abacus, and he brought all this new scientific thinking that he had learned in Spain, where there were lots of very fine institutions of learning in Spain, you know, from the Muslims and from the Christians. And he brought all this stuff into Europe. And one time I was speaking to a group of scientists and technicians in San Francisco, California, and I said, what do you think they did? Medieval people, what do you think they did to Gerbert of Aurillac? And they were all like, stoned him, burned him at the stake, threw him down a well. They made him Pope. He's Pope Sylvester II. And that's what the Middle Ages was really about. It was light. It was bringing light into the world. And so modern universities begin in Bologna, Oxford, England, Cambridge, Paris. These universities are 11th and 12th century inventions. They're not inventions of the modern world. The oldest continuously operating hospital in the world is St Bartholomew's in London. Nobody even knows when it was founded. It was either the 9th or the 10th century. So the modern hospital is a product of the medieval people. These were Catholic people. The modern university is a product of the medieval people, Catholic people. Modern agriculture, modern metallurgy, many, many things that these medieval Catholics discovered were passed on to the modern people to start the modern era. The modern era was not built on their failures, it was built on their successes. If it was such a dark age, why do we fall apart when we see one of that dark age's cathedrals burning in Paris? Why do we feel sad and like something truly valuable is being lost? Because that's one of the greatest buildings ever built in the history of the world. That's not a dark age. A dark age people couldn't do something like that. It was an age of light and wisdom and insight. It had lots of problems. But the Christian people of Europe created the first multicultural, multilingual society ever created. It had no king. It had nothing political to hold it together. All that held it together were the sacraments of the Catholic Church. So that you could go from Moscow to Portugal, you could go from Iceland to Jerusalem, and you were among one people. Even if you didn't speak any of the languages along the way, you were a part of one people all built around the sacraments of the Catholic Church. The sacraments of the Catholic Church built the modern world. They made the modern world possible. And I mean this quite literally. The monks of Cluny took the Eucharist up into Germany, where they built monasteries, and those monasteries created the nation of Germany. Germany, at the fall of the Roman Empire, was an area of forests and swamps. By the end of the Christian era, it was an area of castles and agriculture, and I dare you to go to Germany and try to find a swamp today. That was all done by Catholic monks, bringing the sacraments, bringing education, bringing medicine out to the people. It's a good history, it's not a bad history. And so when I say that the modern world has this upward slope, it really should begin around the year 500, not around the year 1500. But let's just begin, for the sake of modern people, fine, 1500, the beginning of the modern era. 1517 is, in my view, the beginning of the modern era, but you could pick another date. You could pick 1492, the year that the Europeans discovered that there were two giant continents out in the Atlantic that no one had ever known about before. Or you could pick the early 1400, around the 1440s, with the invention of the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press. Remember, that's a medieval invention. That's not a modern invention. And it transformed the world every bit as much as the internet has transformed the world. But I begin the modern era in 1517. Because that's the year that Martin Luther started his conflict with the Catholic Church. There was terrible corruption in Rome at the time, and really bad things were done. Indulgences, we say, well, the church doesn't sell indulgences, but there were particular people who did sell indulgences. Particular people who did. And they paid for things like little projects like St. Peter's in Rome. So I'm not saying that Luther didn't have things to complain about. But because of the invention of the printing press in the generations before him, he had a new tool in which to confront the Catholic Church, and it was writing. And so in 1517, the Protestant Reformation starts. A new thing happened that had never happened to Christianity before. Far, far more important than the split between the Orthodox and the Catholics. That's nothing compared to the Protestant Reformation, because when the Orthodox and the Catholics split, both of them kept all 7 sacraments. Both of them remained liturgical sacramental churches. Martin Luther invented something that had never existed before, and frankly, something that Jesus did not teach, a non-liturgical, non-sacramental Christianity, which is impossible because Christ gave us sacraments. So the beginning of the modern world begins with the shattering of Christendom. It shatters it. And hundreds of millions of people, billions of people since then, have been denied access to the Eucharist and denied access to many of the other sacraments. This is a real loss because it's the Eucharist that built Europe, that made Europe what it is. It was monks who made Europe what it is, building their monasteries and their chapels and eventually their cathedrals. So what I want to show then, starting with Martin Luther, is that there is this upward slope. But there's also a way in which medieval people left spiritual gifts for the world, and there's a downward slope that comes even to today. The loss of spiritual gifts that the world had all through that last 500 years till today. And the first great spiritual gift was the unity of the church around the Eucharist. That's a real loss. That's not a small loss. Christ in the Eucharist is the power to build healthy, wholesome families and civilizations. And that was lost at the beginning of the modern era. But it's only one of 4 losses that I want to point out to you, to share with you, to remind you of. Because you know all of the things I'm going to say. I'm not going to say anything new. I just want to put them in order for you to reflect on. This was a terrible loss, and it marks the very beginning of the modern world. The loss of the liturgical union of the Catholic Church. The loss of the liturgical union of all Christian people. So that you could no longer go from Germany to anywhere else in Europe and say we're of the same family. Now you couldn't, because Christendom is sundered. The next loss follows a couple hundred years later, and it comes in Southern Europe, not Northern Europe. And you would think the shattering of the church you wouldn't think this, but this is what the Reformers thought. This will give us a clearer emphasis on Jesus. We'll be focused on Jesus. But that's exactly what the next Reformation that followed after the Protestant Reformation got rid of. Were people like Voltaire and Rousseau, people like Thomas Jefferson in my country, the people who we call deists or philosophs. They said, well, why do we need Jesus? God is good and we have the power of reason. We'll just follow that. The Declaration of Independence that founded my country. Thomas Jefferson wrote the line that our rights come from nature and nature's God. There's no mention of Jesus in there. That has gone by that time. There's no longer a unified sense of Jesus at the center of culture. Now God and reason are at the center of culture, which is not bad. That's a pretty good thing to have. God and reason are both very, very good. But that's a loss. To first lose the union of the church and next lose the person of Jesus Christ at the center of culture, these are losses. At the very same time that there's all these gains being had, we're losing spiritual goods. And you notice that when we lose these spiritual goods, there's evidence of it in the world. Art changes, music changes. So like, who's better in your mind? Mozart or Kanye? Right? Kanye is really good. He's really good. But there's a loss that has happened. Most musicians can't read music anymore. Like there's a loss. Most painters, like people working in the arts today, cannot draw by hand. Like, Da Vinci draws by hand. Painters have lost that ability. They can't do what earlier. So when you lose spiritual gifts, you also lose the things that are born of the Spirit, the high-level art, the high-level music. Even our philosophy is devalued. We have dumb philosophy now. We're dumber philosophically than we were when Thomas Aquinas was alive. There's a real decline. The spiritual decline is not phony or ephemeral. It's human. And when humans lose it, they lose qualities of their humanity. The architecture of Chartres Cathedral is greater than the architecture of many of our great buildings today. Because we've lost something that aspires in the way that those people aspired. We've lost something that knows the world in the way that those people knew the world. So our buildings got uglier. We lost the union of the church, the liturgical union of the church. We lost the person of Jesus. But then, a couple centuries pass, and it's the 1800s. And we get Karl Marx, who intentionally decides we have to take God out of the equation. And then we get the science of Charles Darwin, who is unintentionally gives assistance to that project. Darwin didn't mean to do that. He's a great scientist. That's what he was. But 1859, we get the Origin of Species. That went out of my head. The Origin of Species. And that's followed by weirder and weirder people like Sigmund Freud, who want to tell us that all of this psychology, all of this biology, all of this physics, all of this chemistry, it can be explained without reference to God. And so by the end of the 1800s, there's a growing atheism. Now, why did people accept that growing atheism? I do not believe it's because these ideas were convincing. In my own mind, I believe people were ready to accept an atheist philosophy because they had already been robbed of God by the Industrial Revolution, which took them out of nature, put them into urban places, covered the sky with pollution. You can't experience God in these situations, so then you will believe people who say there is no God. The loss of God is felt before it's intellectually justified. So this is the third loss, another spiritual loss, the loss of God. And in Europe, in the late 1800s, in the place where Christendom had happened, these losses have been most successful in Europe, in the place where Christianity was born. In dumb places like where I live, America, where we don't think deeply like Germans, we were like, we still love Jesus. We still love Jesus today. And we will shoot you if you don't love Jesus. No, okay, sorry about that. But you know, we still haven't let go of Jesus in America. But that has something to do with being non-cosmopolitan. The cosmopolitans, they did let go of Jesus. They let go of the church, they let go of Jesus, they let go of God. And in its place, they created what they called the balance of power, where Germany would be armed to the teeth, and France would be armed to the teeth, and England would be armed to the teeth, and Austria and Turkey and Russia would be armed. And when everybody's armed to the teeth, that's the end of war. We can't. We're so smart. We've solved this thing. Who would ever go to a war in this situation? Except in 1914, everybody was armed to the teeth, and everybody went to war. And they killed 50 million of the brightest, most beautiful Europeans of their time. The bravest, the most wonderful. They killed Americans. They killed New Zealanders. They killed people all over the world. And you know what they were fighting for in World War I? Think about what they were fighting for in World War I. You can't think about what they're fighting for in World War I because nobody knows what that war was about. The Germans had the exact same religion as the British. They were the same families. Nobody could tell you what the First World War was about. It's because if you let go of the church and Jesus and God and you decide you're so smart, you can do without all that, you're in trouble. And that trouble erupted into the First World War, the Great Depression, the Second World War. Now here's the deal, because I know that you're feeling very cheerful right now. I know I've got you very cheered up at the moment. What a miserable American. We're going somewhere good, don't worry. But we got one more loss to get to. We lost the liturgical union of the church. We lost many people lost the Eucharist. We lost the person of Jesus at the center of culture. Then we even lost God. We let go of God. And then we got this terrible violence in the first half of the 20th century. If you think these things are not related, fine. But I would like to meet your psychiatrist. I mean, of course they're related. They're clearly related. One leads to the other. Medieval people would not have engaged in this warfare. The Pope in Rome, during the First World War, ordered the Europeans to stop. This war must stop. They didn't care what the Pope said. They'd given up on the Pope hundreds of years before. There's no way this could have happened. It's not just that the medieval people didn't have the weaponry. They didn't have the weaponry. But they couldn't have killed on that scale. That's not how medieval people thought of war, in a completely different way than modern people did. Modern people gave themselves permission to do these horrible things. And now I can't prove my point, but I don't think medieval people would have given themselves permission to do these horrible things. There's one more loss, and it's worse than the first three. So buckle up. But you're going to know it. You're going to recognize it when I tell you what I'm thinking of. You already know it. I'm just going to put it into words for you. After the Second World War, the world was terribly traumatized. There was the revelation of the murder of 6 million Jews. The murder of innumerable people by communists and Nazis. Not war dead, I mean murders. There was innumerable murders. My own country blew up 2 cities to end the war with Japan. Each city incinerated in a fraction of a second. There is no theory of war except the most barbaric, inhuman theory of war, but there is certainly no Christian theory of war that can justify destroying Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was a crime. You cannot intentionally kill innocent people, even if it will end a war. We know that because St. Paul told us, you may not do evil that good may come. Here's a sad fact. The majority of Catholics in the United States still believe we were right to drop those bombs. It hasn't sunk in that that was murder, that there is such a thing as warfare, and you can kill a lot of people in warfare, and not one of those killings is a murder. But if you drop a nuclear weapon on people who are walking their babies down the street, you are now a murderer. So there's this terrible trauma after the Second World War of what have we done? And we've buried it, and we're not dealing with it. And it's very, what are we supposed to do with the trauma of what happened in Germany? What are we supposed to do with the trauma of Bomber Command from Great Britain? Which every single night, Bomber Command murdered people. They knew they were murdering people. They dropped bombs on civilians on purpose. So there was no country that was accepted from this. And the horror of the nuclear destruction of cities will always be a black mark on my country. Always. What were we going to do with this? Well, here's what happened. In the years after the Second World War, people began to reflect on what they had done over the last 450 years. They returned to the practice of the Catholic faith. They went back to church. They returned to Jesus and the sacraments. We started a civilization of love. Wait a second, I'm sorry, that's an alternate history. None of that ever happened. But you know what did happen? There was an invention in the 1920s that was delayed in being shared with the world during the Second World War because all of the industry in the United States where this invention was made was tied up with the war. But in 1950, they sold 1 million of them, 5 years after the end of the war. And there's never been less than 1 million of them sold in any year in the United States. You all got one in your house. Many of you have them in your pocket right now. Television. Instead of dealing with reality and dealing with the trauma that we had inflicted on the world, instead of dealing with the moral problem that we had clearly exhibited, we just turned on the TV and we went in the living room and sat down. And there's almost a cliche in England where the fathers had fought in the Second World War. It's a kind of a cliche thing about the father who never talks to his children about the war. He just sits and watches TV in the 1950s and 60s. This really happened. Instead of dealing with the trauma, we just turned on the TV and we drifted away into television. The first loss is the loss of the church. The second loss is the loss of the person of Jesus. The third loss is the loss of God. And the fourth is worse than all of them. It's the loss of contact with reality. We went into unreal worlds and that's where we live. And unless you live in an unreal world, you can't do the things we do today. You can't tell yourself that a pregnant woman does not have a baby inside of her. You can't tell yourself that you can medically change a girl to a boy. These things are not real. That's not the real world. We are not living in reality when we say those things, when we believe those things. And the reason we don't live in reality is we turned on the television, we never turned it off, and we got lost in it. We live in air conditioning. I notice everywhere I go where people drive, they drive with the windows up. Like nobody, you hardly ever see people just letting the breeze blow through the car. We air condition the air in our car. When we're driving through perfectly good air, we instead of going out into nature. Now you're very different here, and I know you have a reputation for being out in nature. So I'm not trying to insult you, but I'm saying in much of the world, more people have seen nature on their TV than have gone out to see nature. There was a survey done of astronomy PhD students. PhD astronomy students at a major university in California. They just asked them one question, every PhD student in this program. Have you ever gone out on a dark night to look up at the Milky Way? Fewer than 50% of astronomy PhD students had ever actually looked at the Milky Way with their eyes. They were experiencing the universe through instruments and calculations. They never actually looked at the universe. As a matter of fact, some of them didn't know how to find the Milky Way. Like, well, how would I do that? You know, you got to get away from all the lights and all that, but maybe here it's better than the United States where we have a lot of light pollution. We have to go out to the desert, you know, if we want to see that kind of drama. But do you see what I'm saying? We engage with the world artificially instead of engaging with the world directly and humanly. The fourth loss is the loss of reality, and it is the worst loss of all. So our job now as Catholics is to live in a world that has suffered all of these losses and doesn't see a way out. As a matter of fact, won't even admit that most of these things are losses. Like, ask the average person, do you think it's a loss that at the very beginning of the modern world, Christianity was shattered? Of course they don't. They don't believe Christianity has a value. But they also believe that there was a period called the Dark Ages, because they don't know anything about the history that came before the history where they tell themselves how great their personal history or national history is. They don't know the history that made their own history possible. So how can we recover from this? Well, the first thing is there's a time to reap and there's a time to sow. And I have some news for you. You are never, ever, in the Catholic sense, going to live in a time to reap. Look around at the faces in here. These are the people God chose to sow. And sow, and sow, and then die and go home. It will be our grandchildren's grandchildren who will reap what we have been called to sow. But the people who lived at the end of the Roman Empire, people like Augustine of Hippo, the greatest mind probably in the history of the church, he knew when he wrote the book, The City of God, his lot in life was not to reap, but to sow. In the High Middle Ages, people like Thomas Aquinas, in the great universities, these people were reaping seeds that were planted 500 years before them. We are a sowing people. We just got to get comfortable with that. Our role is to be consistently planting the seeds that will flower generations after us, building the institutions that can nourish those seeds. Those institutions will include monasteries again. We need to begin inviting young people back to the monasteries, back to the priestly life, back to the religious life. Those things worked before, they will work again. But there's a new role for the laity in all of this. We're far more highly educated than the laity of the earlier period. Even of the High Middle Ages, the laity was not educated like people are now. So we have a role. We have to sow with the priests and with the sisters and with the brothers. We have to encourage our own children and our own grandchildren to take up this task of sowing. But the other thing about this is, there's a great hope in that. History is so long. And God equips the people that He puts in any era. You know, that era of the fall of the Roman Empire created innumerable saints. And so this period also will have its saints. And many of the saints from that period, we won't know their names until we reach heaven. And there may be saints among us here whose names we won't know until we reach heaven. But that's what it takes. That's what it takes in order to restore what has been lost. This upward slope can't continue if this downward slope continues. There's a point at which this is no longer possible because people are no longer honest in the sciences. Well, we've reached that point. There's tremendous lying going on in the sciences. If you don't have a culture that tells people not just that they need to be great scientists, but they need to be good people, or science won't work, science will die. This can't go on forever like this. And there's a basic rule of philosophy. If a thing can't go on forever, it won't go on forever. It will come to an end. The end might be a terrible crash. It might be something else. You know, we're told that the population of the earth will reach about 10 billion people in 2 generations from now. And then it will begin to drop and it will go into an irreversible decline. Once there's a certain point at which you begin to lose so much population so quickly that the decline can't be reversed. So we don't know what the world will be like 100 years from now. We don't know who will be left. The statistics out of China, I don't know if you have seen the demographic statistics. It's terrifying. China will never be bigger than it is today. And 50 years from now, it'll be like 400 million people. That's the size of my whole country. 400 million people less than today. That's total demographic disaster. But there's people having children. And many of them are people of faith and hope. And those children are seeds that are planted. And our schools are seeds that are planted. We have a really tough job to do, but it's such a glorious and honorable job to be given the job of being the people that plant the seeds for the next great flowering. Thank you, I forgot about this. I just need a little shot of whiskey, excuse me. Imagine if I could drink whiskey. Like if I did that with whiskey, I would literally die right in front of you. I would just die. Do any of you drink whiskey? Are you whiskey drink? Oh, you're good men and women. Good Lord, I can't do it. I think that's very un-American of me, that I can't drink whiskey, but good Lord. I will just keel over if I drink that stuff. When I was 12 years old, my dad was a doctor, and I used to clean his office on Saturdays for money. And I found that he kept a bottle of whiskey in a cabinet there, and I had seen all these cowboy movies. And so I poured myself a shot of whiskey. Did you ever do that when you... Oh, Lord. I thought that I was going to have to call an ambulance. Like, I thought, oh, this is humiliating. So I've never been able to drink it since. I put myself off whiskey at 12 years old. And I don't think I finished cleaning the office that day. This is a time of great, great difficulty. The darkness is really real. It really is. But look what the Holy Spirit is doing. The Holy Spirit has given us this new thing called the theology of the body that's taking over among Catholics all over the world. And it's not just a theology of having babies. It's a theology of love. Love between men and women, love between parents and children, love between families and within families. It's a magnificent thing. There it is. There's that seed that got planted. We have this seed of Catholic media, which never existed before, and now is popping up everywhere. There's hope all around us amidst this hopefulness. As long as we don't expect these things to come to full flowering in our lifetime, as long as we truly have lives of service and make our lives into lives of service for others, some of them others who won't be born for generations. Our task is to set the conditions for other people to have the glories of Christian society again. Not Christian society that's imposed on anyone, but Christian society that's chosen because people discover it again, like the people of the medieval period discovered it, and they wanted it, and they loved it, and they lived it. We've got so many gifts in the Catholic Church. Activate them. Get out there. Use them. Share them. Turn over that soil. Put down those seeds. And then don't worry. One of the things that we don't do at Catholic Answers is complain about the Catholic Church. It's just too easy. You know, it's like complaining about road work. It's always going to be there. There's always going to need to be road work. They're always going to make you late. And you're always going to say, why does it take them so long to get this road done? Because it does. There's always going to be these scandals and difficulties in the church. What we need to do is remember that Jesus is still the Lord, and He's done it before, and He'll do it again. And this time it'll be bigger and involve more people. And it'll be truly a Christian society. It's coming. You can't stop it. And the important thing is getting people to heaven. And a society that is constructed remembering that its goal is to get its children to heaven, not just to get its children into college. That's a truly healthy society, and it's coming. It will be here again. We're going to pass through a century or two of real difficulty. And then it will flower. We don't know the date, but it will flower. The thing that I would like to leave you with is, in my view, and this now I'm sharing with you a mere low-level radio host's opinion. I don't think we can do that act of restoration by just running the tape backwards, saying, well, let's help people return to reality, and once we've got them kind of acquainted with reality again, let's introduce them to God, and then once we've got them comfy with God, let's throw Jesus in there, and then once we've got Jesus in there, I don't think that will work. That's not how it happened the first time. If you know which way the tape played, you got to go back to the tape and play it frontwards. Don't try to play it backwards, which means the proclamation of the fullness of the Catholic faith all the time, every day, not ashamed of any of it, but proud of it. This is our faith. This is what we believe, and this is the truth. God loves the world. God so loved the world that He sent His only begotten Son. And He left gifts for His people. And those gifts, more than anything else, are 7 sacraments that make us holy and get us to heaven. We got it. We can't just play the tape back. We got to go back to where the whole thing started and proclaim the whole thing with absolute shamelessness. Give them the whole thing. Because It has a power. And when we give them the whole thing, there's enough people that'll grab onto that, that those seeds will flower forever. So like I said, that's an opinion, but it's a pretty strong opinion I have. This weak stuff of half measures to try to get people kind of slowly in a certain way is not going to work. What's going to work is joyful, powerful, fully Catholic communities. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention, especially with my voice so bad.